Charles, are you ready to rip?
Let's go.
Hell yeah. Okay. So, dude, it was really cool getting to know you a little bit over the past couple weeks. But for those people who come into this podcast who don't know who you are, why don't you give us a little backstory about you, your zone of genius, and how you got connected with us?
Yeah, man. I'm a professional graffiti artist. It's what I've been doing for the past 20 years of my life, and basically got connected with y'all, man, just because I saw some of the content that was being shared, some of the discussions that were being had, and I had to reach out directly, dude, just because there's some things that I'm listening for in the creative realm. And when I hear them, I
Mhm.
go after those people, man, to try and find and connect some of these missing dots that I think exist in
Yeah.
the creative field professionally.
And so, out of curiosity, like, is there something specific you're looking for that you feel the creative space is missing? So that's how you know what it is or when you found it? Or is it just kind of that spur of the moment, like, that's the thing?
You know, it's been a long form issue, dude, to be honest. Basically, when it comes to the clash between like the introverted nature of artists versus like a
Mhm.
lot of the problems that they encounter professionally, trying to sort that out and find a way, man, to have a discussion about some of the things that are missing via like social media promotion, maybe even too much of a focus on like social media feedback. There's a balance, man, that should be obtained within those two scenarios, but it's a great tool to use, dude, to help people do what they love for a living. It's just like you got to take it all with like a grain of salt, grain of sugar, kind of figure out the balance, dude. And yeah, and that's kind of what it's been, man. I've been in a situation where I've been extremely fortunate with a lot of opportunities being a professional artist. I see some of these things missing, man. I see some of this dedication, some of the motivational aspects of it, some of the drive, just that like that aggressive drive creatively that exists in a lot, it tends to exist in a lot of other professions, man. But I think going back to the nature of artists and more of an introverted personality traits that they might have. uh, I think it hinders them, dude, and I think it
Mhm.
it it would be great to talk about, like, the energy and the discipline that it takes, man, to be able to do what you love for a living, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I
Yeah.
think you're absolutely right in the fact that I think a lot of people hide behind their art. It gives them value. But as you had said just a moment ago, like you see it so prevalently in other industries when it comes to the confidence and the discipline. Because the thing that I've noticed the most having worked with and in other industries is people have to dedicate themselves fully to skills because they don't believe they have a talent. So you build the confidence, you build that energy as you're acquiring more and more skills. Where artists, it's a double edged sword because the talent almost comes naturally. So you don't have to do as much self work because this
Yeah.
just comes so organic.
Yeah, dude, it's all the other stuff on the back end, dude, because like you'll watch just like tremendously talented people just like fall by the wayside, dude, a little bit
Mhm.
professionally, and it's just like it's a real tragedy, dude, because you would like for them to, have some sort of path or, some sort of like fiber to be able to like attach some of their motivation and dedication to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Build up that momentum, kind of figure it out economically for themselves. And it's something that I've been able to do. I've run into not many people who are doing it, dude. That's why when I heard you say something, I gravitated towards you guys immediately, dude, and reached out immediately, because I was like, these are conversations that need to be had. These are missing in the education system when it comes to art and you being an artist in that field, in that professional field. These are discussions that are not being had, man. The discipline in oneself outside of the talent, because
Yeah.
you can waste your talent so easily, dude, if you're not applying it accurately. you know?
Do you think it's a matter of not enough people starting the conversation or not enough people wanting to invest themselves in the education?
I think that it is I think that it's a couple things. I think that it's not talked about nearly enough, for sure. A lot of times when I'm speaking to other artists and folks that are having a hard time getting their feet wet or getting their stuff up off the ground, basically it's just like, well, what are you doing? How are you promoting yourself? Are you using
Mhm.
all of these, free platforms and situations to your benefit? Do you have do you use social media on a personal level or do you use it on a business level? This
Yeah.
is like one of my largest arguments, dude, about it. You know what I mean? Is like,
Well,
people having a real life on social media, which to me I totally disagree with. I don't think you should live on
yeah.
that fucking platform whatsoever, man. But I feel totally differently when it comes to conducting business and conducting yourself professionally, utilizing this more of like a tool than like a living outlet, And I think that's a big part of it, man. I think that these discussions don't get had in the art community because it is, man. It's more of a little more like wishy-washy sort of emotional profession. And so I
Yeah.
think that it doesn't land very strongly or maybe even too strong sometimes when you're like, okay, well, the talent is there, but where's the dedication? Where's the motivation? What are you doing on the back end of your talent to help support it in the end? We spoke before about like lifestyle and like all of the behind the curtain stuff, that helps
Mhm.
drive your creativity, and whether or not you're taking care of that part of your life as well. So that's where I
Yeah.
think that it comes from, dude. And yeah, the conversation's not being had enough. It's literally why I'm here right now, dude. It's because I heard you speak, saw that it ran parallel with a lot of the things that I was thinking, and then boom, hit you guys up immediately. Like, let's have this conversation, man. Because I think there's more people
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who are hungry to hear this type of stuff, need to hear this type of stuff. But there's a finite amount of people who are talking about it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I think a lot of what you're saying, it does come with maturity, and the caveat to it is to be a really, really good creative, you have to maintain a little bit of your childlike wonder, but
Yeah.
with the maturity comes the understanding of your emotional maturity, your emotional regulation to know what is and isn't appropriate for the business development end, because you can create in one side of your brain,
Yes.
but you have to be able to market with a completely different set of skills.
Yeah.
And a lot of artists, they tend to just wear their hearts on their sleeve and be very emotional
Yeah.
creatures. But that's also why you see the trauma dumping and the virtue signaling and the mixed bag, which then
Yeah.
hinders your ability to target or to relate with more quality clients because it is so spontaneous. And I think one thing that
Absolutely.
I've noticed having conversations with you is your emotional maturity or just your genuine approach to being a more mature, more refined artist because of your tenure and what it is you've done and being able to I mean, the reference you said yesterday was there's the trunk of the tree, then there's the branches,
Yeah. Yeah.
and a lot of that maturity is created through the growth of the trunk, of the base, of the strength of what you do.
Yeah,
And I
man.
I think that's where a lot of people lack is the desire to wanna leave the immaturity and the pirate's life behind, to be
Yes.
more of a mature, refined artist, to work with more refined and quality clients or consumers.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Because I mean, eventually you have to accept the fact that, man, there's a company that's reaching out to you or a client that's reaching out to you. They're going to want to spend their money with you. You have problems
Mhm.
that you need to solve with this person visually. If this is what you're doing, as far that's what I do, man. I try to think of myself as like a visual problem solver. How can I help
Yeah.
bridge a gap between this client and their clients and the message that they're trying to convey, and they're asking me to be the person to convey that message. It's like, well, a lot of that, dude, you have to leave yourself on the sidelines. You know what I mean? You have to leave yourself away from that, and you kind of have to you kinda have to immerse yourself in the situation at hand, dude, and being versatile as an artist really helps this. And then also having that pillar of structure, it allows you to reach into different avenues, dude, And
Mhm.
then, you still have this underlying understanding and, you know, maturity within your craft to be able to do that and not completely lose yourself and not completely, sacrifice any sort of like quality or pedigree of work, therein, because that's another thing too, is that, it's hard to branch off into new, with new clients, new customers and stuff like that if you're not 100% confident, and the
Yeah.
confidence level, building that with the behind the scenes things that you're doing in your life and stuff like that. Like it reflects so hard, dude, on what you're able to produce professionally, you know?
Well, I think a huge component to that is the understanding of the difference between worth and value. A
Yeah.
lot of us know what we're worth. Deep down inside, it's how we feel. We know what we're worth, but until we can understand value being from a consumer's perspective, that's kind of the pairing of the two. The hardest thing that I had to face was first putting a price point on the thing I dedicated my heart and soul to. That was a
Yes.
really hard thing to wrap
Yeah.
my head around because I always wanted
Yeah,
to
man.
chop myself off at the knees because I was just blessed to be able to do it. But
Mhm.
what wound up happening, and I think it's intrinsically what's occurring in the creative space with so much competition and so much saturation, is people diminish their own worth because of the competition, which then brings down their belief in the product they produce, which
Yeah.
then means the value the client gets in the grand scheme of things is also diluted.
Mhm.
But there's artists like yourself who can understand every aspect that goes in from product production to branding to the marketing, as we had said, is just the buyer psychology and also the full experience that a
Yeah.
person gets. One thing you said that I really want to tap more into actually is when you said you're a creative problem solver. The one
Yeah.
lesson that I learned in business is you have to be able to solve the problems of the clients you wish to serve. So, can you talk a little bit more about the specificity of like the creative problem solver and how you perceive that or how you utilize that as an asset?
Yeah, man, and, it's funny because this ties into exactly what I heard from you that brought me to you, and that was basically that, you get a lot of art directors, creative directors, they have their finger on maybe a pulse, but if you're working outside of that niche, dude, like, they really have no idea what's going on, and so
Yeah.
that's your responsibility. Like when you get brought on as the artist of hire, you assume that responsibility straight away. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I have holes to fill here, and what is this brand? What is this client trying to convey through me? They brought me on,
Yeah.
it's going to be ultimately my skill set. It's never really going to come back to them. I mean, it might if you're, depending on who you're working with, the client, the brand, however it is, but ultimately it's like it's your art that you have to stand behind. So you really have to bridge that gap, dude, and that's where it comes into like the problem solving where it's like I got to know what they're trying to convey and I have to know what I'm capable of doing, of the utmost quality. And then you have to figure out a way to put those things together, man, so that your name is not tarnished, but actually polished after the project. And then whatever they're trying to convey is well worth the money that they spent, hiring you to do this job. And so I mean it goes through everything. And like I even when I take on, even small clientele or anything like that, it's like I'm trying to think about a bigger picture, because you might have answers to questions that they haven't even asked themselves yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Creatively, so you can set yourself up for more work down the line. You can present a versatility before they even ask for it, dude. And then they're never going to pick up the phone to call somebody else. Never ever, you know? They're always going to confront you first, dude. Remember, he was talking about this before we were even talking about this. When we were talking about this one job, he was already thinking about all the other possibilities. And I think that's a big deal, man. I see it in clothing design and stuff like that, logo design, branding, packaging, all of these things, where it's like, well, are we doing a logo? Or are we doing like a full-blown, like, branding campaign, you know what I mean? Let's look
Yeah.
down the line after we do this. Let's think about all the merchandise you're gonna put this logo on if it's not just for a brand, you know? Is it gonna be merchandised, you know what I'm saying? Like, all of these things, you come to these situations with all of that in your head ready to go. That's you solving a problem that they don't even know exists yet, dude, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
I think this is really
There
important,
is
you know?
there's so much to unpack there because I think everything you just said with being able to creative problem solve, it starts with using your creativity through curiosity. You
Totally.
know, when you're working with a client, whether that's with a large mural or a branding package or even a tattoo, we have to come into everything with the curiosity that is going to spark those questions to find the real root problem. You know, you
Yeah,
truly, as the artist that you are, and as the artist that I am, we are setting a tone for a person's either permanent or professional perspective of how they are perceived moving forward. You know, when you
completely, dude.
get when you get hired to come in and fill a space on a wall that just needs that love and needs to be able to have that branding stamp of sincerity and to be able to like show the value of what this business is. No different than with a client who wants to fill a sleeve. You have to be
Mhm.
curious about their story more than just taking it at face value. You need to be more curious to understand that this story that you're putting on someone's body permanently is going to be a badge of honor, and it speaks volumes to anyone who gets the opportunity to meet this person, to conversate about that piece of art, or to be able to
Yeah.
really understand who they are at their core sincerely.
Yeah, man.
And that I believe a big issue with artists, I don't want to say tattooers, but artists in general, is they look at it from such a baseline of
Yeah.
I'm hired to do the project, complete said project, on to next
Done.
project. But that
Yes, dude.
curiosity alone,
Mhm.
huh?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, carry on, because yeah, I mean, compositionally, right? This is also a thing
Yep.
too, right? I mean, especially even in the tattoo game, you know, like, well, you know, I wanna get a tattoo on my arm. Well, you know, like, let's think about your anatomy. Let's think about what story you're trying to convey with the artwork you're gonna put on your body that's gonna last for the rest of your life, you know? Have you ever thought about composing a grander scale tattoo when I mean, you know, tattoos, this is there's a lot of this is anatomy that we're talking about, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, composition to me is a huge deal when it comes to art. So it's like, you know, like, are you just going to get your arm done? Or do you want to move that piece into your chest? Do you want to move that piece
Yeah.
around your body? You know, how do you want to look when you're butt naked with that tattoo on? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
let's be real, you know, let's think about this, you know, because I really appreciate like, you know, Japanese traditional and stuff like that, where like, you know, there's a large potential to move artwork through your body compositionally all around you, you know? It's like, dude, a lot of people
Mhm.
haven't even thought about this, I'm sure, you know, like when they come in to get a tattoo. And this is the same all across the board, you know. I'll go to bid like mural jobs or graffiti jobs or even branding and logo design and stuff like that. And it's like, well, have you thought about this? You know, have you
Yeah.
thought about like, you know, because this is true in murals too, because people are like, "Well, we want a little mural right here." And I'm like, "But for the same amount of time and maybe a little bit more money, you could actually because of the material used as far as like spray paint is concerned, you could do the whole kit and caboodle, you know what I mean? You could do
Yeah.
a whole entire building, you know, where they might not have even thought about it, or at least move an image through compositionally like a building or something like that, just differently that they might not have thought about. And that's you solving a problem, you know, a problem that
Yeah.
they don't even know exists necessarily, you know. And it's
Yeah.
just you have a solution at hand already. You know what I mean? And I see that too with tattoos, with all forms of art. It's like a lot of these folks don't even know the maximum possibility, you know? They just don't even
Yeah.
know, you know? Not everybody's so visually savvy, dude, you know? So that's where you come in, you know, I think as an artist is like, hey, like have you ever thought about it like this? Because this is totally possible and can be done, you know? And so, yeah,
You know
sorry
what I
to
love about
interject
all of
quickly.
that? What I love about all of that is it kind of brings you back to the fundamental of not only the curiosity of I mean, when we were kids and we would fill every single corner of every single page in a notebook with doodles and art, you know, you would utilize the
Yeah.
space properly,
Yes.
appropriately, and sometimes spilling off all the fucking edges.
Yeah, bro.
And like one of my favorite things in not only the way that I design my art, but in the way I even build businesses and the way I live my life is generally through understanding the fact it doesn't need to be condensed, but you can tell the story past the borders. But you can
Totally.
also utilize an S curve. Talking
Yes.
about the understanding of anatomy. I think all things have some sort of anatomy or framework that we need to
Mhm.
be able to understand and how we can utilize all of that space to the best of our ability. So when you design a
Totally.
tattoo, it used to say in my bio on my tattoo page, anatomy enhancement, because
Mhm.
I understand the muscle structure and how to be able to complement the delt in comparison to the bicep and the tricep. If you plan on having any sort of body transformation, if you're going to lose weight, this tattoo is going to move. If you're going to bulk
Mhm.
up, this tattoo is going to move. I've tattooed bodybuilders, and I don't want to take away from the striation and their vascularity. So we have to design for that in mind. And the same thing works with when you're doing a large mural or when you're doing a canvas painting, like understanding how to utilize it to its best degree so that when somebody looks at it, their eye is drawn around the entire thing, not just to a particular point, and condensing it to something so minimal expand
Yes.
so rapidly. And that works in life and in business and in art and even in faith. You and I had the conversation of faith yesterday as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. And that's the thing, man, is like that's why I think that this conversation is so important to have, man, on a just a broad scale because it's applicable to everything, dude. That
Mhm.
point of view, that perspective, applicable to absolutely everything, And if you're the type of person who knows how to look for that and then also knows how to manipulate that, then you have a responsibility to contribute that, dude. I mean, I genuinely feel that, you know, because any client you're working with, let's not even say a client, let's just say a student, even. You know what I mean? Let's take economics out of it entirely. Well, let's talk about a student. Let's talk about somebody who is just trying to get their finger on the pulse of quality art. Do they even think about this? Have they ever thought about this? Is composition really at the forefront of your mind? Because it is for me, like at all times, dude. I'm always looking through the eyes of composition. I think photographers do a good job with it, inherently walking around figuring out what you can fit into a frame of a photograph. You're not manipulating it yourself as a photographer. Do you know what I'm saying? You're finding it,
Yeah.
as like a painter, like a tattoo artist or something like that. It's like we have the ability to manipulate the image. I mean, imagine the inherent, compositional understanding of going out and finding it in like its natural existence. This is
Yeah.
commendable. This is stuff that I really, really get into. But I mean, it goes back to the science of problem solving, man. I guarantee you that there's a handful of art directors, creative directors out there. People are hiring on visual folks that, dude, this stuff's probably not running through their brains, to be entirely honest. And
Yeah.
I think it comes from, the career artist more so, you know what I mean? The career painter, the tattoo artist as well, man. Compositional anatomy. It's funny because you bring up anatomy and like I'm a graffiti artist, professional graffiti artist. That's what I do is I manipulate letters, dude. I manipulate
Mhm.
letter forms. That's my whole entire life, dude, is abstracting like typography. And so that's how I go about lettering, dude. I look at all letters and like every letter in in a lot of alphabets, but in our alphabet, at least the English alphabet, they all have anatomy, dude. Like a T, a
Yeah.
T has arms, an S has a spine, an R has like a leg, it has an eyeball, it's like when you can start seeing it that way, then you can manipulate it thus far. And it helps, dude. And it helps seeing the world that way as well. I mean, compositions in the painting and the fine art world. I mean, dude, it's a really important thing. There are whole careers of abstract art that are built specifically off of basically two things, dude. And one is composition and the other is color theory. I mean,
Yeah.
like if you're an abstract artist, you're taking imagery completely out of it, you know? And you're just riding the coattails of those two, ideologies, those two fundamentals of
Mhm.
art, composition and color theory. And to be able to make something impactful by completely neglecting imagery and going just straight for those fundamentals has always been so amazing to me, you know? I'm a big fan of abstract art in that realm. You know, people will see like lobby art and stuff like that, you know, and they're like, "Well, anybody could do this." And I'm like, "There's some predetermined math in there that you're not familiar with, just so you know?" And that always
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The beauty in all of it, I think, with everything that you just said, man, I think this is a really good time to move into the life and the business of having a creative profession or like being in a creative career because a lot of the time that's when art becomes less fun when it comes with the professional badge when it comes with the rigid approach to thinking freely and creatively in the product and then all these rigid guidelines and borders you have to stay within. But I think the abstract approach is what makes being a professional creative so much fun. You know, the reason I have an opportunity to work with the high earners I do in other industries is simply because I have a set of skills that they lack in my creativity while understanding the application to the skills that they dedicated their lives to truly earning. So, with all of that, like talking about the anatomy and the abstract approach to art and understanding composition and color theory, apply that to life and to business. How have you been able to build, let's start with business, with those things in mind, or how have you been able to gain the skills to make your creativity consistently flourish?
Well, dude, you know, a lot of it is back end stuff. You know, when I was younger, I spent so much time dedicated to the actual art itself and just getting good at art, you know, getting good at painting, understanding how to draw, understanding how to paint. Then you realize, dude, that there's just a lot more to it, you know, being able to sort out your personal life, your faith, you know, these are significant parts of all of this, dude, because it helps you it helps you adjust your scope of discipline that you need to maintain to be able to, you know, I don't want to word it incorrectly, but basically, man, to be able to maintain a certain amount of confidence, to be able to take yourself serious enough to, let's say, approach companies, dude, with your artwork, you know, to reach out, you know, to be able to, you know, form a website, you know, form, you know, a legitimate social media following on the professional side of life. You know, these are all byproducts of things that happen behind the scenes, dude, you know? And, you know, with our previous conversation, that's just what it ends up being. I used to think of art much differently, you know? I think a lot of people are like this too, man, where like you think that like the best creations that you can come up with or that you ever, you know, end up creating are through maybe working through some sort of trauma or some sort of like negative aspect in your life, you know? I think
Yeah.
that's like a big deal when you start art is because it becomes an outlet, you know, it becomes an
Yep.
escape for you, you know? This is all fine and well, and I totally understand why this exists because it was exactly that for me, dude, you know? But when you start to take yourself serious as a professional, you know, what are my goals? What am I trying to reach with my creative drive and output?
Mhm.
Do I really want to stay immersed in trauma or negativity just so I can put out amazing work? You know, it has you
Yeah.
rethink everything, I think, dude, you know, to the point of now I've made a complete shift in life, dude, which this has been for a long time because I've been doing this for a while. But, you know, now it's damn near impossible for me to create anything of quality without very positive levels of regular life surrounding me, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to have a great relationship with my wife. She's the most important person ever to me, you know? My children, man, making sure they're provided for, making sure they're happy, making sure I'm spending, you know, good quality time with them and helping them grow. They're at that age, you know, they're, you know, 8 and 11, dude. It's like, you know, I'm here for them, you know. The taking care of these situations in your life, dude, like your actual responsibilities outside of your craft or your profession. I think a lot of people, man, avoid going down these roads because they think it's going to hinder their creative output. And
Yeah.
I can just sit here today, dude, saying that that is the complete opposite, bro. Like, once you find somebody that you're madly in love with, once you create life with that person, once you're in tune with the fact that There's a grand creator of everything, whatever your faith ends up being. Being able to let go of what you hold so tightly actually allows it to flow through you far more potently,
Yeah.
and so I think that's just a huge part of it, man, where it's like, it's that confidence level, it's making the right decisions in life. It's taking care of yourself, whether it's physically or mentally and emotionally, all of those things are highly necessary, by the way, not just one or the other, all of them. These are all super important things, dude, that they affect your creative output more than I think anybody really realizes. And once you take it to the positive level of those situations, it starts to unfold like you would never believe. Like you almost can't even keep up with it, dude, which is good because it allows you to be able to choose the right clients, choose the right projects that you want to work on. You know what I mean? Everybody has to be versatile. Everybody has to do what they have to do to make a living, especially as a creative. You got to be able to sort of manipulate a lot of different mediums, in my opinion. It goes back to the creative problem solving conversation. Yeah, man, it's a big help of like even just getting it off the ground, having the confidence within yourself to be able to reach out to folks, to be able to maintain a professional demeanor within yourself at all times, and everybody's vulnerable at times. This is perfectly fine. But yeah, you're building a business. I mean, shit, man, and having the discipline to do so, having the discipline to be able to wake up and go to work, if not for somebody else, then for sure for yourself,
Where do you think that the fabricated honor of the starving artist mentality comes from with all of that? Because that was the one thing that kept coming back to my mind when you were talking about people who create through trauma and through negative experience. And then the alternative, the polarization, is people who are driven by positivity, love, and discipline, because they are truly polarized. If you live in the gray of those things, it's the void. There is
Yeah, dude.
no outlet, there's no outcome. It's
Yeah.
just it's purgatory. But so I think a lot of artists that at least we've worked with, carried conversations with, and really tried to like inspire, they were so wrapped up in the fabricated honor of what I consider poor brain, no matter how offensive that is, or the starving artist mentality. That was why they couldn't break through the glass ceilings into that driven, focused, disciplined, professional, creative. So, do you think that's a huge component? Do you think that the love that you feel in your faith and your family dynamic gave you the skills and the ability to expand further? Or did it start with finding self love, which then invited better love into your life to set a precedence of what your standards would be in what it was you were capable of accomplishing?
Think it's
That was a
like an
lot to unpack. I'm
It's
sorry.
cool, bro. I'm all for it, man. I think that it's a continuous game of ping pong, dude. I think that one side feeds the other. I think that in hindsight, I could have gone about things quicker if I were to have understood that at a better time, dude. You know, Embrace the fact that there's back end work that helps the front end work. You'll
Yeah.
see this a lot in social media, man. Well, you'll see like a lot of people who appear to be extremely happy and successful. And ultimately, that is just not the case outside of that screen. The starving artist, I don't care for the term, to be honest. It's, in my opinion, these conversations are to directly combat that, because dude, artists historically have been some of the most cherished people in society. Nowadays there's a huge saturation, possibly an oversaturation of artists. It is what it is. This is the world that we live in. This is just fine. We carry within us, dude, a view of the world that a lot of folks don't even know exists, and I would challenge every creative out there to be able to inject the knowledge of that notion into their confidence level as they proceed professionally, because dude, like, it's completely up to you, you know what I mean? This starving artist scenario is like, it doesn't have to be that way, you know? It never has to be
Yeah.
that way, you know? Take yourself seriously on the back end, you know? Try to, initiate some emotional stability not only in your life, but within your artwork as well, you know? Be able to not only hear constructive criticism, but apply it, bro, you know?
Ooh, yeah, big
And
one.
yeah, a big one, dude, you know? In graffiti, man, graffiti is a crazy lifestyle, dude, because it glorifies just some of the worst behavior that you could ever imagine to where like people who are considered legends are just like borderline just homeless folks, dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's wild, dude, because like the reason I even am so adamant about having this conversation is because I'm older now, I'm 40 years old, dude. A lot of my friends are older now, and what I have seen is like this undying clench to one's childhood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like not being able to move past certain points of life and being able to, have a more professional outlook on what you've spent so much time y- dedicated to, So, dude, and there was one other thing that you said, and it just passed me.
I have to get this off my chest while we're on the topic of conversation because this popped into my head as you were speaking. I also I think if we reframe what starving artist means, we can all be flourishing starving artists, but it's a matter of starving for what?
Yeah,
Because as you had said, artists since the beginning of time have been cherished, but they lacked something, which is why so many of them lost their fucking minds, relied on go as far back as ether, in all the
yeah,
different, drugs that they needed.
yeah,
It wasn't to help with their creativity, it was to escape the demand of people wanting just the one part of themselves.
yes,
So my question to people is, I think in the world that we live in today, you're not a starving artist because you're going hungry necessarily, but it's because you know that you're lacking something inside of you that's screaming for attention, that's screaming to not be neglected.
totally.
And if if we can pinpoint what that is, and we can give that our creativity and the same passion and purpose that our creativity gets, then we can start to become fully aligned. I feel like I'm starving for something at
Yeah,
all times, but because of my maturity and my discipline, I do a better job of editing and auditing like where the holes are to be able to give them the time and the attention that they deserve, Like there's been times in my life where I realized like I've neglected my own physical health. So I dedicate a little bit more time to that. And I know where I can pull from because we can't give everything 100%, but we can give most things our undivided attention.
yeah,
My family is they are foundational for me, but I've had to go to the point where like could I do this in a different world? Had they not been a part of my life, would I be in the same place? Not a fucking chance. But everything happens for a reason. And from that reason, we grow, we expand, we flourish. And then we find new things that can positively impact and strengthen that foundation.
absolutely.
But I think in a sense, the artist mind is always yearning for more. We get done with something and we're proud, 30 minutes later, it's not good. What is it
Absolutely.
that we're starving for that we didn't get to apply there?
Yeah, totally, And that's the thing, it's like and then maybe you don't go directly to creation again after feeling that, right? Like, maybe you turn around and you pour your effort elsewhere, because like, I mean, let's talk about currency for a minute, dude. Like, let's talk about what the like, the word currency actually fucking means, you know what I mean? And to me, I think that socially, it has you thinking that it's just money or just,
Mhm.
just merchandise, just goods, This is absolutely not the case, dude. You know what I mean? Your family, your relationships, your drive, your motivation, your dedication, your discipline, these are all currencies, dude, And like it's socially they'll never focus on that. You know what I mean? And I think that there's a lot of people out there that are richer than they think that they are, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a huge deal in being able to, like, shift your perspective, dude, and understand that it's like, you have a lot of gold in your pot. It's just about, like, whether you're capable of seeing it or not, dude, you know what I mean? And all of those things take work, man, they all take effort, you know? It is what it is. I saw something, dude, that was just, like, basically, like, the amount of good things in your life directly is a direct result of your ability to notice them, you know?
Mhm.
And it's like, it makes perfect sense, man, because, a lot of people, a lot of people have, loving partners, they have loving kids, they have, a talent, an art, they have opportunities, but, socially, you're looking at more, entertainment, all of this stuff is jabbed into your brain about like
Yeah.
having more and having more of like specific things, Nobody's
Yep.
like, you should have a fucking loving wife and great kids, and you should also be a support pillar for your partner, and you should also be there for your children in every capacity that they need, right? Like these are not things that are discussed. You know what I mean? These are things that are insanely important, especially in a creative's world, because it helps have you maintain that trunk, that pillar, that foundation to be able to build discipline and motivation on top of, and
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, man, I mean, the starving artist, I mean, look inside yourself and realize, like, you have so much to contribute. It's just about understanding how to apply it. It's about understanding how to motivate yourself to find different avenues to apply your creative drive, these sorts of things. And this isn't discussed. This is not discussed at all. They don't talk about this,
Yeah.
nobody talks about this. This is definitely not taught in like upper education when it comes to like the art field, these
Yeah.
sorts of things where it's like if you want to maintain any sort of creative drive and output, there's a lot of stuff you're going to have to want to keep you're going to want to keep in line. That's where I'm at with that. Yeah.
A part of me really just like came to the forefront of my mind when you were saying that because I being an ex-alcoholic and an ex-drug addict and everything, like I always yearned for more, a little bit more, just enough to get me by, but it wasn't because I was infatuated with the substance itself. It was because I lacked something in myself that only I believed that could fill.
Yeah.
So as you had
Yeah.
said, I think it's very, very common where we've neglected ourselves so much as just the vessel of the product, and we realize that everything flows through us. If we neglect that segue to the product, then we're always nothing's ever good enough. We're always wanting more. We're always wanting something externally to validate and to justify the worth that we have. And I mean, it even goes back to like me being adopted. I always felt like an outsider looking in. I always felt like I didn't belong where I was. So love never made sense. So if people are constantly looking for love, but they don't know what it feels like, they're inevitably always going to look for something they don't understand. So the hunt will never be through. But once you have it here, it's a lot easier to pinpoint what is and what isn't. That doesn't mean you
Hmm.
can't continuously work to enhance what it is you've achieved. And that goes with art. I believe creativity is the state of being that you understand. Love is something that you don't aim for as a goal, but it's something you consistently refine. Happiness is not a thing you can set as a goal, but it's a byproduct of massive levels of joy repeated frequently enough that it's just a state that you can survive in. But like any other skill, it can be fleeting if not consistently refined. If I drew for 10 years, quit for 10 years, I would have to start back from the beginning,
Absolutely.
and I think it works that way in life, business, and creativity. But I think that comes from a level of first personal understanding and then also a not expectations, but standards.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. You
So
know.
I guess my follow-up for you, because I would love to know your insight on this, is what is your creative standard? Not just in the product you produce, but in the life that you lead. Do you have a defined creative standard that you maintain, or is it ever changing?
It's ever changing, dude. I mean, it's kind of both, man. There's ultimately a level that I want to reach, but that's a personal goal. That's not even like the best that I or anybody could ever be. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like, that's me, you know, but what I always consider myself as is a student of art, dude, you know? And so this keeps my love alive for it because like the most masterful shit that I could produce possible, I'm always gonna beat myself up a little bit for it, dude. You know what I mean? And I always know that like, dude, if I got there, then I know I could just get there. And then that
Yeah.
happens. And then you know you could get there, you know, and it's just like and just before you know it, like your top tier is down here again, dude. You know? And so
Mhm.
it's like just this constant climb, man. And then also, having an open mind about different styles of work, different mediums and stuff like that. You know, if you have a constant my head's just constantly on a swivel looking at certain things that either I'm not, very adept with and would like to learn, or things that I am very much know that I'm capable of and I see and I like have to figure out how to execute that, to kind of like handle something within myself, you know. You know, I hate seeing something done that I knew that I could do and that I didn't do it. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm like, okay, well, let's get to it. Let's figure out how to do that. If I have to do it for myself for free, I mean, that's the cool thing about being a graffiti artist and a graffiti writer, dude, is that I can go paint. I will just go paint something. You know what I mean? Whether somebody pays me to do it or not, I have a support structure, I have a sponsorship for spray paint. I can just go paint, bro, So creatively, if there's something that I want to figure out, I'm going to go figure that out, dude. And I only say it with spray paint because, murals and graffiti art and stuff like it's a very liberating art form because it gets your body into it. You really are at one with that medium as you're doing it. I mean, it's similar to airbrushing and tattooing, to be honest. Similar with anything, but it's a little bit more laborious. There's just more physicality to it a little bit, so it actually helps you stay in tune physically and stuff like that. Because as a 40-year-old, I'm like, dude, I'll put it to any like late 20-year-old dude. I'll flat foot race you right now, because I just, I want to maintain that, dude, within myself. But yeah, dude, there's never a plateau that I'll never be on that plateau. Even if I think that it exists sometimes or anything like that, I'll never be there, Because from that plateau, dude, I might be looking down at a valley and then up at some other hill that might interest me that's even slightly different that like I'm not there right now. So like, well, let's go over there and see, you know? And so, yeah, dude, but the standard is ultimately, if I have to answer that question 100%, the standard is the best of my ability at that very moment. 100%, doesn't matter what I'm doing. I try to make sure that it is the best that I am capable of doing at that very moment. And I think that every
Yeah.
project deserves that. Every client definitely deserves that if you're going into the economical, professional side of things, but also for yourself, dude. You know, there's a tremendous amount of integrity, dude, that comes with like finishing a product and doing it to the best of your ability, and then that leads you into the next project, which you're going to do that one to the best of your ability and hopefully exceeds the last project.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel about that, dude.
Love it. And I think what I love about this, having these conversations or building out the Force of Focus creative standard community is in every industry, in every walk of life, 10 is your one. You know what I mean? Like you said, by the time you get to the glass ceiling and you break through it, you're at your next ground level, and my starting stage could be someone's peak that they're trying to hit, and vice versa with the mentors and the guides that I still actively have in my life. And to have that social circle, to have that network of people who don't carry the resentment or the starving artist mindset with them, but truly working around people who are high achieving, not for necessarily the revenue generation, but truly testing what's possible, what they're capable of creating through their creativity, and being sat in a room with people who all just want that accountability, want that guidance, or want to be able to guide more freely is something that is truly lacking. Is the more saturated it becomes, the more kung fu grip people get on who they are, where they are, and what they feel as if they've earned. And so there's
Yeah.
not a lot of sharing in the vulnerability of what it truly takes. Cause I mean, I think you've tapped into this quite a few times. It's not a matter of how much you can produce as much as it is how full you as the person can become to be able to produce. It's not
Yeah.
a matter of what you do, it's a matter of who you are while you do it that makes all of it that much more possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I had a little screen issue. Yeah, dude, and that's why it's important, man, to always be in a group of people who are learning. Always be in a group of folks that can learn, that are very much trying to be that. Trying to better themselves, man, whether it be anything. I like being around dudes who want to be better husbands, man. I like being around dudes who
Yeah.
want to be better fathers, bro. I want to speak about those things while I'm doing art with these people. And then I also want to have the artistic conversations as well, man. In my older age, this is getting harder and harder to find, dude. To be honest, it
Yeah.
just is what it is, bro. And that's why I'm very eager to have these conversations because I know for a fact that I'm not the only one. There's no way. There's no way because I heard it from you. I heard things that I was listening for. I spoke with Jake about this as well, where it's just like, man, like I hear it. I'm a different soul. I hear it and I come to you if it because I'm looking for something and I'm looking for someone and I'm looking for people who
Mhm.
are running this parallel. Not everybody not everybody is like that, dude. Not everybody's as outgoing as to just send messages and have the foundation of like some success to be able to be listened to, or pursued. There's regular folks that need to hear this, man. There are people who are trying to get their shit off the ground that they need to hear this, dude. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think this helps, and it's hard to find, bro. It's hard to find. It's not covered in the creative world at all. So many folks are so introverted that they're not having these conversations. And a lot of times you have these conversations, man, it becomes an issue of like some folks feel attacked, sort of, because maybe they're
Yeah.
falling short in some of these situations. And it's just like, listen, man, we're talking about this stuff because I'm talking about this stuff because I've experienced it and there's real world results that I live with on a day-to-day basis from living this way. And so
Yeah.
I want to contribute to people who need to hear that, dude. You know, it's a big part of it's a responsibility. As a creative, dude, it's crazy, man. Like if you're good at something, you're responsible for it. I mean, I hate to,
Yeah.
I hate to put that shit onto people's plates, but if you're good at something, you have a responsibility to that, and you have a responsibility to not only do it, but to contribute to like the betterment of it. And maybe it's a lot of responsibility, but dude, that responsibility makes a good life, dude. I mean, it does, man. Waking up and feeding kids and talking with your wife and being present for your loved ones and having projects to work on. It's like idle hands are the devil's work. That's real. So being able to accept these responsibilities of talent and skill and discipline and move forward with them, amicably is it's very important to me. And I feel like there's a lot of purpose that can come from people who embrace that as well, dude, which will take away the
Yeah.
starving artist shit. And maybe we'll see more artists eat because of this. You know what I mean? Maybe we'll see more artists put themselves out there like, hey, like, I need to get to work, dude. I'm going to get to work. You got to work somehow. And like I said, you're going to
Yeah.
work for somebody or you're going to work for yourself. I mean, it changed for me when I was just like, hey, I'm going to schedule myself to go to work for myself. I'm going to put myself on the schedule. Now I'm going to
Yeah.
wake up. I'll wake up and I'm going to do my art.
I couldn't agree more, man. I think you had kind of tapped into something that I think is what the modern day starving artist is. I don't think it's so much as the cut and dry starving artist, I don't have food. I think people are truly starving for the social circle that inspires. I view motivation and inspiration very similar in the fact it's a starting stage. Some people just need to be motivated to get one foot in front of the other until discipline can kick in. No different than inspiration is the starting stage to being able to truly live as a creative. And a lot of the time, the pro and the con is what it is we surround ourselves with, what it is we're consistently absorbing. I mean, how many negative artists do you see all over social media? And not just artists, individuals. There's so much honor in virtue signaling and like victim mentality that it's almost diluted the attention that true pain needs, because people who have truly been through pain desperately find a pathway through it, where people who find value in pain desperately try to maintain it. And I think that societally has caused a lot of damage and a lot of gray in people having the resources to be able to know that, like, pain is so temporary as long as you're willing to work through it, and that is the true starving artist now, I think, is just finding the desire to want to work through and to transcend, to evolve. Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of it has to do with what you're looking for also. Like, because a lot of people, they can overlook all the good things that are around them to grow from, because they're so desperately and intentionally looking for all of the bad. But with all that being said, man, we're gonna need to wrap today's up. I want to do this again. I genuinely am gonna love the hell out of this conversation moving forwards.